Hey everybody, it's Jacqueline from Unmistakably You, and I am heading in towards Wedding Planning Simplified. Now, Amy's going to be joining us shortly. If you know anything about the storm yesterday, I'm sure that there are a few other people having some technical difficulties. So, in true Amy fashion, the queen of technical difficulties, her modem got fried. So, I'm going to be kicking us off with the intro today. So, we today and this entire month have been chatting about those last minute details or those last minute panic moments that most couples have because we are gearing towards a lot of a busier wedding season. So, obviously, summertime brings a lot of excitement and a lot of turbulence moving into it. And that anticipation for your wedding day likely is causing you to have a bit more stress than normal because maybe you've spent more months planning a wedding than the average Joe since we're coming out of a bit more livelihood after this pandemic. With that in mind, we wanted to make sure that you have all of those last minute day of details that give you that extra enhancement for your wedding day to make it even more personal. Amy and I stress about it all the time that there are no wedding police, but there are some great areas where you can include some really personal details that just enhance your wedding day, not only for yourselves, but for your guests and selfishly for all the photographers out there. It definitely creates a more diverse photo album for you, and it gives you a lot of great keepsakes to be able to pass along to family members, keep for yourselves, whatever it might be. So today, we are specifically chatting about those last minute day of details. So we're going to have a few different pillars, but we're mostly going to be chatting about some main points. So getting ready, what that can look like, and some day of details that can get skipped. We're also going to be chatting about the setup portion of things and some things that you can consider there. The transportation element of a wedding day, because we often find that when we ask couples, hey, that's amazing, you have your photo locations. How are mom and dad getting there? There's usually a little bit of a lull. So we're going to touch on that as well. We're going to discuss how you can line your processional up and things to consider there. We're also going to chat about some photos that you might want to have, as well as some things for you to discuss with your wedding party, with your vendors, with your family members, all about the day to keep your photo timeline running smoothly and on time. We're going to chat about the cocktail hour and some day of details that you'll need to touch on in there. Obviously, we can't forget those big main entrances. If anyone was on our Instagram this morning, you may have saw that one of our couples did a great entrance in, and it was just a lovely light up moment when they finally were announced in with the same last name. So it was a really cool moment. So we're going to chat about those entrances as well. We'll go over a few of those day of details about the reception element, as well as no one ever likes this one, but we're going to talk about what you need to do to clean up your wedding day and a few things to consider the after fact of your wedding. Now, luckily, Queen Tech of Difficulties is back in. She is all ready to go. So, Amy, you're back. The modem is fried, but you are not.
Yeah, it's been a day, and then I had to go grocery shopping, and I'm flying in from that, and of course, nothing just wants to work with the tech right away. So
Oh gosh,
I'm
no.
on my
And after
phone.
a double wedding weekend, why wouldn't it?
It's it's been a little bit busy. I'm
Just a
just
little.
noticing in the background there's probably a mess. I'm sorry. Ignore the
It's
mess in
okay.
the
If I
background.
lean to the right side, you can see my little gnome friend that I thought I tucked away, but I had forgotten to. So
It's all good. I normally with my other angle, I'm okay. I could crop out the
you
mess.
can hide the mess. You're okay here. I think among friends, I had said with the storm, there's probably a few people cleaning up their backyards. Maybe you're getting a tree off of your house if you're my in
Eek.
laws.
Yeah, it was bad out there.
It
So we're
was.
gonna We're going to talk about some of the implications of unexpected weather conditions for your wedding day as well, because we definitely experienced that yesterday times three.
I lucked out. I don't know what I had tucked in my little fanny pack, whether it was a rabbit's foot or a lucky penny, but somehow we were okay for the most part. But I think you and Jen definitely saw the worst of it.
Yeah, yesterday was not fun. I mean, it turned out absolutely perfectly, and our couples were both ecstatic and very thankful that they had us there because we dealt with a lot of things. I sourced 3 generators last minute because we had no power. So
All the
it
more
was
reason, toot our own horns, day of coordinators. Because if it wasn't you, I don't know who would have been sourcing 3 generators for that couple.
Well, and this is the thing, and so this is one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about these details today. And I can't see comments, and I can't hear anything, and I'm on my phone, and I don't. So please let us know if there's any audio echo or anything. I also can't find my earbuds, so we're just let us know. But anyway, recognizing and tooting our own horns, to be honest, that having a day of coordinator is so, so important. I can't count how many times I've heard the phrase, "You are the best money we spent on this wedding. We don't know what we would have done without you." But we understand also that that's not within everybody's budget, or maybe their families are resistant to having a third party come in and they say, no, no, we can do it. So even if you have a day of coordinator, what we're talking about today is going to be important. And if you don't have a day of coordinator, it's extra important to make sure that you don't lose it on your wedding day when there's a freak storm that blows up out of nowhere and you're getting ready at a hotel that has no power. And like, what do you do? Thank goodness my wedding party yesterday went through hair and makeup super fast, so they were done by the time the power went out. But I have done weddings in the past with no power when the girls are trying to get ready with curling irons that don't heat up.
Just gonna say those little sock ribbons can only do so much on limited time. So
Yes. Yes. So today's plan is just to kind of go through, I think, vaguely chronologically in the order of the moments of your day that you will probably experience. We can't possibly in 20 minutes give you a complete overview. So we are more than happy to chat with you in person. We can set up a consult and actually help you to go over those details. We also have a super helpful document that we will plug in for you to download. Once I figure out how to get it to Jacqueline or post it with no internet. So
we'll
anyway,
get it to you.
it exists. We'll get it to you. So Jacqueline, what is most important from your perspective when you're getting ready, whether you have two girls' parties or a girls and a guys' party? Let's talk there to start off with.
I think a big one for me is just making sure that all of your vendors, and again, this is usually laughable, make sure your vendors know which hotel room you're in. Make sure that you send them the Airbnb address. I know sometimes those Airbnbs, you only get them 72 hours in advance. And there's a lot happening the 72 hours before your wedding, but it is crucial that your hair and makeup artists know which entrance to go into,
Mhm.
or else you could start some things delayed. I know that for photography, there's that tight window of those getting ready shots where it actually has the makeup artist and hairstylist in there if that's important to you. So having to call you while your eyes are shut, it's a little bit hard for you to see where you need to go and where they need to be.
Yeah.
Another big one, and Amy, I know you talk about this all the time, but making sure you're eating while you're getting ready. You don't necessarily have to sit down for a big meal all together because, again, you might not have the time, but having food available for everyone to slowly pick at, even if you think you won't eat on your wedding day, you'll be too nervous, you'll be too excited. I always joke I become an Italian grandmother at weddings, and I'm like, have you eaten? Are you hungry? Can I get you food? What do you need? But it's a big
Yes.
one.
Absolutely. And I've been seeing a lot of just sort of grazing all day happening lately. So you can certainly bring in sandwich platters or something like that. But yesterday, my wedding, they just kind of had an assortment of food and they picked at it when they wanted. And that's helpful too if you do have a nervous stomach and you don't want to sit down and eat an entire sub, let's say. You know, if you grab a strawberry here and a piece of cheese there and maybe some complex carbs and some protein somewhere along the way to hold you through, definitely really important.
Another big one, and again, I'm stealing this straight out of your book, but after you mentioned outdoor activities, it gave me a little throwback. I had mentioned during the little intro of our wedding party the other day that we come with our fully stocked emergency kit. So sunscreen, aloe, all of the things. And sure enough, my wedding party went golfing. They did photos out in the sun. By the end of the day, there was a beautiful bronze shoulders. There were a couple red faces. So as much as they really listened to me when I said, don't wear sunglasses while you're golfing, don't wear those raccoon eyes, making sure that you pack a hat, making sure that you've got sunscreen on for any of those outdoor activities. You know, it feels weird in May that we've got heat up to 28 degrees, but that sun is out to get those shoulder blades. And it's a long day. So if you start feeling those sunburns at 6 o'clock, it's only going to get itchier. The more you dance, the more you sweat, the more you sit. So be
Yeah.
prepared.
And even just for wedding party photos, I mean, I was running around yesterday and I don't know if you can show you my bra strap here. I'm a little red because I didn't practice what I preach and
A
I was like,
little
"Oh,
red.
it's overcast. I'll be fine." I was running around getting generators and sourcing an alternate first look location because our tent almost blew over. So, um I was busy and I didn't put sunscreen on. And just even on an overcast day, my daughter pointed out to me this morning that I was not being very responsible. So,
Always good when the 4-year-old puts you in check, eh?
yes, I know. She does it frequently.
I love it. I love it. And like Amy said, there's tons of things to consider when it comes to getting ready and all of those details. But a big one to consider comes to going with what Amy had mentioned, your first look. A lot of that timing gets really crucial. So, Amy, what's your advice with first look details? What should they bring? What should they have?
Yeah, so in the morning, if you are doing any kind of getting ready photography or videography, you're going to want to think about packaging all of your details together first off. So your shoes, your jewelry, your perfume, if you did a hard copy wedding invitation, bring an invitation. Bring anything that's going to be meaningful and helpful to your photographer when they're creating those little flat lay photos or those vignettes that are going to help to tell the story of the wedding day. So packing that all in advance and having it set in a easily accessible location for your photographer is important. Typically, what we see is photographers arriving just a few minutes before you actually get dressed. So talking through the timing of the photography with your photographer or with your videographers, because certain things take a lot longer than you think. If your dress does up with buttons and you need a crochet hook, make sure you have a crochet hook, because otherwise trying to get those tiny little loops over those tiny little buttons is super time consuming.
Mhm.
Things often like first looks, if you're doing a first look or a reveal to your bridesmaids or to your dad or a first look with your partner, those things take longer than you think. So make sure that you clearly talk through things with your photographer and videographer. Another thing that tends to be more specific to video is if you're doing letter readings or card opening, gift opening from your partner to you, and you want to capture that on video, it takes longer than you would think. So just making sure that you're not just focused on the timing of your actual formal portraits, which we'll talk about in a minute, but thinking through the photography and videography coverage as you're getting ready is really important, because there are a lot of little things in there that you may not allocate time for. And then all of a sudden you're running super late before your ceremony.
Absolutely. And on that note, make sure you're letting your videographers and your photographers know if you want the audio of those letter readings and of those vows. Often than not, they've got everything prepared, but just so that way they know to pack an extra lapel mic. Maybe they have one that'll match the suit or be able to hide into your dress a little bit better. So being really open about your expectations of them, as well as the expectations of what you'd like done in that time. To be clear is to be kind. That's all I'm saying.
And that actually brings up another point that I hadn't even thought to talk about. But at our wedding on Friday, the videographers actually made us a little bit late for the ceremony because they were trying to hook up the bride and hide the lapel, like the battery pack for the lapel mic. And so things like that, I mean, who thinks about that the day before the wedding or the week before the wedding? But you always want to try and allocate extra time for everything, because everything takes more time than you think it's going to require.
Now, one thing that definitely takes more time than you think will require, in my opinion, is setting up your wedding day.
Mhm. And it's impossible to cover all the details, because some of you are probably getting married at full service venues and some of you have full service florists and decorators, whereas others of you might be doing a backyard wedding and you're doing a lot of DIY. So we can't possibly tell you every single thing. But what we can tell you is that a lot of times you'll be doing the setup on the day before if your venue is available, or if you're in a barn or a tent or something like that. So do as much as you can the day before. We talked last week about prepping all of your decor in individualized totes for the day, so that if you're not doing the setup, we know where to put things and how you want it set up. But if you have most of that done the day before, and then you can just leave any paper products or like your guest book, your card box, your table numbers, that kind of thing, to be set up by someone on the day of. That will save a lot of headache on the day if you have it well organized and if you have somebody in charge of setting that up. You want to make sure that you communicate with whoever's doing your setup, whether it's a venue coordinator, a day of coordinator, or a friend. Um, or sorry, I'm getting texts on. This is why I don't do lives from my phone. Uh, um, you just want to make sure that you have everything really well organized and communicated to the person doing your setup. And again, we ran into this on Friday, Jacqueline, where I mean, Jenna was the most organized human on the planet.
A plus. If we did
Oh
grading
my
systems
gosh.
and report cards for our bride, we'd promote her. She would
Yeah,
just be president of the entire school.
absolutely. But we were doing the setup and she had everything meticulously organized and lists and check and pictures and all the things. But what we didn't account for was the time it was going to take to get those totes from the inn where she got ready to the barn where the reception was. So by the time we schlepped all of her totes, again, we were running late. So allowing more time than you think. And I mean, we've been doing this a really long time and I didn't even account time for that. So we got it done, but we were moving.
Exactly. So that's why confirming your delivery times, your addresses well in advance with rental companies, your decorator, your friends who might just be dropping off their seating chart poster that worked really well for their weddings. You're borrowing some stuff. Confirming when they're going to arrive at the venue is critical for your being able to schedule that setup time and delegate. The other thing that I often hear is there's often a concern to put linens on tables the night before because of the morning dew. I personally, it's a double-edged sword. You're either putting it on and risking morning dew, or you're putting them on the day of and risking running out of time to set up all of the things. So, are there any tips that you can give Amy to keep the morning dew off of those floor length linens for those outdoor weddings?
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing a tent or a barn wedding, you're contending with elements. You're contending with wind. If you've got, you know, napkins or paper products, that's what we dealt with yesterday in our tent. It was a wind tunnel. You're dealing with moisture overnight. You're dealing with bugs crawling up your table linens and making a nice little home on your charger plates. So, I mean, in a perfect world where you can afford to have your professionals perform additional services, I think the best option is to have a decorator or a caterer come in and do your linens and set your tables on the day of. If you're doing them the day before, if you've got floor length linens, we often recommend if you're setting your tables, fold your linens up over your table settings so they're off the ground. That performs the double duty of keeping your linens dry and keeping any airborne bugs from getting into things. I have had couples who've covered their tables with poly the night before. So there's no perfect solution. And if you don't have professionals coming in to do it, I think you just kind of make the best of it. But then have someone who is not, ideally not a guest or maybe not a close guest, who is going to do your final stuff the day of. So they're going to set up your place cards. They're going to put out your table numbers. If you're setting tables the day before in an outdoor or barn venue, we often suggest putting the glassware upside down so that nothing flies into it. So someone to come in and flip that glassware for you so that you don't have to worry about doing it or sending maid of honor or mom to do it.
Awesome. I know that that is a big concern that I've always had with those outdoor weddings. I can control most things, but the weather and the bugs, they don't listen to me yet. Not quite.
Very, very, very true. So, things that you don't want to be worrying about while you should be getting ready and hopefully relaxing and enjoying celebrating with your wedding party. Um, Now, presumably, you're going to have to transport people at some point, whether that's wedding party from getting ready location to ceremony, or whether it's guests from hotel to ceremony location. So, transportation is definitely something that you'll want to set up well in advance. Since the pandemic, unfortunately, we've been seeing a lot of limo companies, particularly, going out of business. So, book your transportation early. Make sure that you don't forget to give them an updated schedule the week before the wedding, because I can't tell you the number of times when we do a day of coordination, I call the transportation company and I say, and you're picking up at this location at this time. And they say, oh, that's not what our records say, because the booking was made 8 or 10 months ago and things have changed since then.
Mm.
So we're going to keep saying in every single category, make sure you confirm your times and your locations with all of your vendors. But it's because oftentimes you've booked those vendors so far in advance. And as you've, gotten down to the nitty-gritty details, things may have changed by 15 minutes or half an hour. And if you don't communicate that with your limo company, you're going to be late to your ceremony and nobody's going to be happy about that. So
Very
make
true.
sure that, yeah, you're communicating those details the week before. Usually it's just a couple of days before, but oftentimes the company will be happy to share the personal contact information of the driver with you, which is always important. I always make sure that I have that cell phone of whoever's driving, just because if they are running late, if they've hit traffic, then I can contact them. Whereas sometimes, I mean, depending on what day of the week you're getting married, they may not be answering their phones on the day of your wedding. I actually ran into that last night, what, not transportation related, but porta potty related. Super glamorous job here, y'all. Super glamorous. We had a clogged porta potty, like a washroom trailer, right? So it's a flush toilet. It was clogged, and I called the company, and they weren't answering their phones. So I was like, okay, what are we going to do about this? So I found a pipe and I dealt with it.
You made it work.
Super glamorous. But you may not always be able to get in touch with the stop texting me. Oh my goodness, what did I just do? There we go. Sorry. Uh anyway, you may not always be able to get in touch with the company, is what I'm saying. So if you can have a contact for your actual driver, whether it's a bus or a limo or a horse and carriage, whatever it is, that will definitely help.
Now, if your transportation is not with a vendor and maybe you've opted to
Mhm.
drive yourself to the ceremony, maybe you have family members driving to the ceremony, all good. If transportation isn't a big priority for you, there's no shame in taking the minivan to your wedding ceremony. I'm just going to say it. It fits your whole bridal party, it's super efficient. But if you are opting to do that, please make sure that you get your car detailed and cleaned out. If you have a husky at home like I do, you'll know that that dog hair, you can't get that out with a little Bissell the day of your wedding when you realize how trashed your car really is. So make sure you get your car cleaned. The other thing is your car will likely be photographed as you arrive. So if you have, maybe a gravel road that you're going to be driving down to get to your venue, let the photographers know that, hey, that photo is not a big priority. It's not like I'm showing up in a big old fancy car. But if you are, you're going to want to make sure that your photographers know that you do have a personal connection to that driving aspect of the day. The other thing that I always recommend is if your groomsmen or more of the male members of your wedding party are driving themselves, don't give the men the flowers too early because your seatbelt rests exactly where your boutonniere will sit. And more often than not, they're going to forget that it's on there. And that beautiful, kind of expensive item just got crushed before the ceremony. So always opt to give those florals after the transportation.
Yeah,
You
for
also,
sure.
especially in construction season, make sure that you're aware of road closures. This is something that I ran into yesterday. Coming from Stratfordville into St. Thomas, there was quite a number of roads fully closed, and especially with the weather, I was dealing with a few trees also blocking the road. Luckily, I gave myself a lot of buffer time when I'm driving because I kind of drive like an old lady. I drive a little slow. So I was okay. But for anybody who may drive, a little bit faster and cut themselves a little bit tighter for transportation time, they could have been late for a few items.
Yeah, absolutely. So, transportation, lots of other things to think about, but I think those are the main points. So,
Definitely.
we've gotten ourselves to our ceremony, and now you have to think about the elements of actually getting your wedding party down the aisle. Again, this is very venue dependent. Sometimes you will have a minister or a member of the church staff, for lack of a better term. You might have a venue coordinator, or you might have nobody. And your officiant can only do so much when you're in a backyard and they are to lead the procession to the front. So, yesterday, again, to put this into real terms for you, I was dealing with a wedding party that had four youngins in it, and they were adorable. But the youngest was the daughter of the bride, or sorry, the son of the bride and groom. And poor little guy was getting four teeth at the same time, and he was not having any of it. He just wanted his mommy. She actually carried him down the aisle because otherwise he was screaming. And if you are in that situation where you're dealing with a little person, or your dad is emotional, or what, like, you're not going to be focused enough to put the wedding party down the aisle yourself. So what I'm saying is that you probably should have someone who is neutral and who knows the plan to help facilitate that processional process, to hand the ring bearers the little signs, to make sure that the flower girl has her little basket, to make sure that somebody has the rings.
Mm-hmm.
You know, best men are wonderful if they're carrying rings, but I never really trust that they have them when they tell me that they have them. So
I know I always say, "Show me them. Show me the
yeah.
money. Show me the money."
Yeah, so having somebody to organize that is definitely going to take the pressure off of you. You'll also need someone to communicate with, if you have a DJ or a live musician, as to when that ceremony is actually starting, and to talk about music cues. So, when do we change from the wedding party processional into the bride's processional, if
Mhm.
that's the makeup of your wedding? So, having somebody or having a way to communicate that, being super, super clear with your officiant before the ceremony, making sure that they know exactly how the procession is going to go, making sure that you know, and making sure that your family and your wedding party know. This is another thing that we dealt um, with our wedding yesterday, and love them. Awesome. The groomsmen yesterday were so helpful and amazing, and they were running around plugging in generators and making things work. But at the rehearsal, they were wasted.
It was
They'd
a
been,
long weekend. You gotta
I
cut them
know.
some slack, but I know what
So
you mean. It's hard to get the kittens in order when the kittens are sipping their milk a little too much.
yeah, so I mean, even though we'd had a rehearsal, they were clueless on the day. And so again, I keep coming back to, if it's at all possible, have someone organizing that processional. So you've been clear with your officiant, with your wedding party, with your parents, and with your someone, whether it's a day of coordinator or venue coordinator or whoever. Somebody needs to know what order that processional is going in, and they need to be there to help facilitate that.
Definitely. Speaking of order, a huge one that I definitely caught on to is knowing how crucial it is to just use the term bus buddy. Because presumably, if we are doing your traditional stance where the groomsmen are walking down with the bridesmaids tend to be a little bit more in tune with when they need to walk. Is this the right time I'm walking? Am I allowed to walk yet? Can I walk? A lot of questions and looking for it. So if you use the term bus buddy, they'll keep your groomsmen in line. You won't have to worry about anybody walking too fast or walking too slow.
Good tip. I like that.
I I
A little bit
try.
of a stereotype that I mean, the girls aren't always the most on it either, but usually there are some people that are a little more on it than others. So
Sometimes.
having them on board is helpful. Yeah. Now, commonly after you would finish your ceremony, there are some photos happening, whether you've done your first look and maybe your wedding party photography before the ceremony, or whether you're doing it after the ceremony. There are definitely lots of photography considerations. And the most important thing, if you don't have a day of coordinator or a wedding planner in full, the most important thing you can do is be really clear with your photographer, meet with them a week or 2 weeks before the wedding. And it's even better if you can meet with them on site, or if you can scout out photo locations together. And even better if you can scout out those photo locations at the time of day when you're going to be taking the photos, because the sun is going to change and it's going to affect the shadows and the options for photography. So photography is such a huge category. We can't just talk about all the details today, but just very generally, I'm going to say your best options are to make sure that you and your photographer are on the same page, to make sure you've accounted for travel time, because again, like Jacqueline said, it's construction season, and if you're going from, like Western to Fanshawe Pioneer Village and whatever, and there's like construction on Fanshawe Park Road, it's going to take longer than you expect. So make sure you account for extra travel time. Um, and make sure that your wedding party knows exactly what's happening as well, and so do your families. The best thing you can do with regard to family photos is to create a family photo grouping list before the day of. We always recommend going from biggest group down to smallest group, so that you have all of your aunts and uncles and cousins and everybody you've ever met, and then you send them all away for cocktails so that they're not in your hair anymore, they're not distracting you. Uncle Bob can go to the bar, and then you whittle it down to smaller groupings with your immediate family. Write them down, give them to your planner, give them to your photographer, so that somebody can just call out, okay, Bob, Susie, Joey, Billy, and then it's quick, it's efficient, and you make sure that you don't miss anybody, because if you're doing it in the heat of the moment, you're going to forget somebody. So that
Absolutely.
yeah, that list super important. And also communicate with the people who are in the photos prior to the wedding day. We always recommend that your officiant should give an announcement at the end of the ceremony saying immediate family or extended family, please remain for photos. But sometimes your cousins are looking at each other going, are we in those photos? Do they need us? I heard they have champagne at the bar. Let's just go to the bar.
Yeah.
So communication with the people that you expect in photos is really important, as well as predetermining locations and allowing for travel time.
Now, another one to consider before we jump into that Prosecco's
Mhm.
at the bar, let's just go to the bar for cocktail. Make sure you're also keeping in mind, obviously, family dynamics. You might have some partners who have girlfriends versus fiancés, brothers that might have
Mhm.
boyfriends versus fiancés, things like that. Communicate if you'd like their partners in photos as well. I know I've been in position, and it happened a few times at my weddings this past weekend, where the girlfriends just don't know if they're included in family photos or not. So make sure that they know where to be because I had been sprinting around to find a few yesterday.
And a good thing to think about too, maybe doing some photos with those current significant others and some without. You hate to think that maybe something's going to happen, but if your brother's only been with his partner for 6 months, that partner might not be the forever partner. So thinking about setting up some just family photos and then some like family with long-term committed or married partners, it's dicey and, potentially emotionally charged, but something to think about.
I always say in my consults, it's tough, but when you know that it's going to lead to an uncomfortable decision, that's marriage, baby. If you
Yeah,
aren't able to have those little tricky conversations of, oh, how am I going to word this? Work together as a couple. That's the first thing that you're able to work on together is how to handle a family dynamic. So if you're able to do that, you're in great hands. Plan your marriage, not your wedding.
absolutely. Now, speaking of that prosecco that your cousins are after at the bar,
Running for.
generally speaking, cocktail hour follows ceremony. You may be very occupied with family photos, and perhaps if you haven't done a first look, you're doing your wedding party photos at that point. So it's really important that you have somebody in charge of running all of the things while you're off doing photos. So those things, depending again on your venue, your catering, how much service your venue is providing, you may be doing your own cocktail food, which means that maybe you have to get some aunts in charge of that, or maybe you have to have some friends setting that out. Communicating those plans very clearly in advance, making sure everybody knows where everything is that needs to get put out. Um, Regardless of whether you're at a full service venue or a DIY style venue, your guests are going to need some direction. You're going to want to make sure that somebody is in charge of telling them where to go. Often, again, that's an officiant announcement at the end of the ceremony. They might say something before they announce you, like, following the ceremony, extended family, please go to the oak tree for photos. The rest of the guests are welcome to proceed behind the barn for cocktail hour, or whatever it is. So, guest direction to get to the cocktail hour, and then guest direction for when to leave the cocktail hour and when to be seated for dinner. And that's something that we're always very conscious of because we don't want our guests sitting for 45 minutes before dinner is served when the wedding party's still off doing photos going, okay, what do we do now? So figuring out ways to communicate to your guests what happens next is really important.
Absolutely. Now, I saw a quick note, and this is a good one, but make sure if you are handling your own catering for the cocktail hour, that you also are handling your own garbage disposal because maybe they don't have any. Maybe your caterers bring the garbage cans for their service, but then there won't be garbage cans on site for technically your service. So make sure that you've got that covered too.
Absolutely. So hopefully you've gotten your guests seated on time. All of that timing is something that we're always watching for. We never get guests seated before the wedding party is done photos, if that's what's happening. The other thing to mention, actually, just as I backtrack a second, I was trying to segue, but then I realized I should say something else. Sorry. Um, what the heck was I just going to say?
Everyone's singing a pretty song right now. This is what a double wedding weekend will do to your brain,
Oh
everyone.
my goodness, my brain is fried. What was
Like
I just going to
Komodo.
say? Oh, yes. If you are joining your cocktail hour, so if you are not doing, like maybe you've done a first look at all your family photos before the ceremony, and then you have time to mingle at your cocktail hour, that's amazing. Depending on your guest count, we usually recommend that you don't try to mingle for any less than half an hour. So if you've done extended family photos and you only have half an hour left before guests are being seated for dinner, I know it sucks. You want to be with your guests, but if you have a wedding of 100 people, there's no way you're circulating to more than just a couple of them in half an hour. And then it tends to delay things as you move into your dinner, if that's what happens next. So just be mindful that if you're going to join your cocktail hour, you need to allow yourself sufficient time to actually make the rounds and actually talk to as many guests as possible.
While we segue into that very quickly, the other
Mhm.
thing that I always like to talk about, if you are more of an introverted couple, it's a big day. It's totally cool and totally normal and often encouraged by me at least to take that 20 minutes in between photos and seating and just go chill. Go
Yeah,
stand by a tree, drink some water. If you're able to go inside and grab a seat somewhere with your partner, all the better. But take some time just to be with the two of you or even be by yourself if you need it. It's your day. There's no wedding police. There's no reason you need to be on display the entire time if you don't want to be.
absolutely. And it goes so fast. My bride looked at me yesterday at about 8:30 at night and she went, "Wow, where did that day go?"
The
So
same thing
spending a
happened on Friday.
yeah, intentionally spending a couple of minutes here and there with your partner, just observing and taking it all in is really highly recommended
Yeah.
because it goes so fast. And actually, backtracking again to ceremony and photography and all the things, um, if you're doing your family photos immediately after the ceremony, you might want to just tell them, we'll be with you in 10 minutes, and then just take you and your partner off, down a garden path somewhere and spend those first 5 minutes of like, holy crap, we're married together without everybody, wanting a piece of you because it just goes so fast. And if you aren't intentional about spending time together on the day, the whole day will be over and you'll be like, oh, I never really spent very much time with my new husband or my new wife.
Very true. Now, one moment though that I know always goes by really fast, but is really, really fun is those wedding party entrances. They
Mhm.
seem like they go by in a blink of an eye, but you spend months planning out the funny dance moves, the funny props, whatever it might be, just for that little 20 seconds of display time. So, what are your tips there, Amy? What are your detailed moments?
Well, so if you are doing any kind of a grand entrance into the ballroom, into the barn, into the golf course, whatever it is, your guests are seated and it's your big moment. You've probably communicated your choice of song with the DJ. So make sure that you're always very clear and following up and double checking your song choices with your DJ, especially if you are choosing multiple songs for that grand entrance. And then you want to have somebody, again, day of coordinator, an uninvolved third party who's communicating between your DJ or your band and your wedding party and your MC, because often your MC is way across the room. They can't even make eye contact with the wedding party. And then the DJ is over here. And then who starts it, who initiates it, how do we know if the wedding party's ready? If the MC cues the entrance and the wedding party's not ready, it's awkward. So making sure that everybody knows exactly what you intend to have happen there, and then communicating that to your wedding party. And again, personal experience from yesterday, I had a really fun wedding party. They were 6 people either side, and they had a whole lot of personality. So they threw a whole bunch of stuff at me that delayed the grand entrance a little bit. There were costume changes, and there was a wheelbarrow involved, and there was one of those little tight four-wheel ride on four-wheeler things. So, I mean, getting that stuff in order earlier than you think you need to. If you think you're going to enter the hall at 10 to 7, start getting your wedding party ready 20 minutes or half an hour before. Gather them up, get them organized, let the bridesmaids and the groomsmen switch clothes if that's what's happening. That's what happened yesterday. Allow more time than you think you need. Um, and then
Another
just
thing, sorry to jump on you. One
go
thing
ahead.
that I learned yesterday is if that floor plan's tight for your wedding party
Mhm.
entrances, make sure that either you have a third party member take a step back and be like, okay, where's the best place to do this? Because if you don't have a third party member do it, I know that the bridesmaids yesterday were fantastic. We were all trying to map out an idea, but because they were in the wedding party, anytime that they were caught standing still, a guest would grab them to talk to them. So they couldn't even help out the bride where they needed to. So luckily I was there, told a few guests to shuffle some chairs, make some room. But knowing and communicating to your wedding party the least awkward way to get to where they're
Mhm.
going, and then where they're going after they actually are announced in prior to you, because presumably you don't want them to sit down before you and start
Mhm.
pouring their wine and eating their bread before you're even in the hall. You're kind of the main event.
Yeah, definitely mapping out that traffic path is something to think about because for whatever reason, people who set up tables, whether even if it's at a venue, I find they don't think about that. And then I'm constantly having to shuffle tables over, or like you said, ask guests to stand up at the edges of the hall so that we can actually get the wedding party through. So mapping that out and thinking about where they're going to go, like Jacqueline said yesterday at my wedding, we had a beautiful head table set up, and the couple was coming in immediately for their first dance, and I wanted and they wanted to have this beautiful backdrop. They had love marquee letters, and it made a beautiful backdrop for the pictures, but not if there's a bunch of wedding party members standing there awkwardly, or like Jacqueline said, drinking their wine or whatever. So communicating that when you go in, girls, you're going to line this side of the dance floor, and guys, you're going to line this side of the dance floor, and we're going to leave that view open so that we can get nice photos of the first dance. So just communicating that, planning it out in advance, really important.
Yeah. The other thing that's super important when you're thinking of entrances is if you do have a traditional grace, making sure that once your whole wedding party is in, they grab their seats quickly and the MC does a very quick transition into the grace portion of it. So that way your dinner can run on time. We know that these entrances, much like our lives, can go on for a little bit long, and we want to make sure that everybody can get those important details and those great memories that they've created for the couple, whether it is changing into each other's clothes or riding in on a tricycle, whatever it might be. You want to make sure that those details can happen on the day.
Absolutely. So, following your entrances, oftentimes you're moving into a dinner. So, presuming that that is the case, you will have food hopefully coming out. And of course, you've communicated those details well in advance to your caterer. You've somehow let them know who's getting salmon and who's getting beef and who's getting chicken. And we'll do a stationary live where we talk about those kinds of things later because I'm mindful of the time and I'm
But
being.
also, those stationary details are crucial. They deserve their
Mhm.
own little afternoon to talk about.
They do. So we'll cover that on another day. But making sure that you've communicated the flow of the reception with all of the stakeholders. So your MC needs to know exactly what's happening and when. But that being said, often your MC is a guest as well. Sometimes you'll use your DJ as an MC or hire a professional MC, but more often than not, we see your DJ being a guest, and we want them to be able to enjoy their experience and not just have to be watching the clock the whole time for when to start the next round of speeches. So hopefully you have the luxury of a coordinator or a venue planner or somebody like that to manage that for you. If not, it's especially essential that you have your DJ in the loop so that they know, okay, after the last entree goes down, that's when we're inviting up the parents to speak. And so then your DJ can cue your MC so that things flow smoothly. Because otherwise, what we find is that if an MC is kind of left on their own, they'll start things at awkward times where maybe the head table has just been served their food and all of a sudden they call up a speech. And then all of a sudden the couple doesn't want to eat because everybody's watching them and they're listening to the speech. They're not going to be, digging into their stuffed chicken breast when, dad is saying beautiful things about them. So making sure that the flow is really well set out and really well communicated with DJ, MC, anybody giving speeches, prep them in advance, let them know when they're speaking, let them know don't exceed 5 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever your timeline is, making sure that everybody knows what's happening when, and especially your DJ or your band leader or whatever your music situation is, because there are going to be some song choices presumably that are important to play at specific times, like the wedding party entrance, like first dances, father daughter mother son, parents dances, any of that kind of stuff. So you need to make sure that your DJ really is clear on, we're going to do the father daughter dance, but we only want the first minute and a half of the song, or at halfway through the song, we're going to invite in the partner and the other parent, whatever it is. Make sure that you've thought that through and then touched base with your DJ and with let your photographer know what's happening and when. So the week before, you're finalizing all of those details with the people who need to facilitate them and capture them.
Yeah. And like Amy said, don't just forget to let your MC know, and anyone giving speeches, give them the heads up, whether it's a cordless mic or a corded mic, if they want a mic stand, whatever it might be, because again, likely they haven't done this role before, or even if they have, to be clear is to be kind. So if you're able to say, hey, this is when you're speaking, we're using cordless mics, so you don't have to worry about it. We don't have a podium, or we do have a podium, things like that, because oftentimes we get asked, where can I set my book down? And I'm like, well, I guess I can, like, I'll hold it for you, I guess, if you need to. I don't know. But things to think about with that situation, because sometimes juggling a cordless mic and a book, it's tough for some people.
Absolutely. So again, millions of other things we could talk about with reception because it's so personal to you, and you're probably doing a bunch of other things during your reception as well. If you are having any kind of late night food served, make sure that you again are really clear with whoever is making it or delivering it or setting it up for you or picking it up. Jacqueline, does your car still smell like quarter pounders?
It doesn't smell like quarter pounders. It's a lovely mix of Baconators and Junior McChickens right now.
Ah, right. Yes. So we did a lot of picking up. Well, not we, Jacqueline did a lot of picking up of late night fast food for her couples.
Yep.
Um, I had the luxury of not having to do that yesterday. The caterer at my wedding did the late night food as well. But just making sure, again, that there's a set time for that to come out, making sure that you're buying or committing to an appropriate amount of food for your reception. We had probably 3 times more late night food on Friday night than we needed. So,
Meanwhile, yesterday, those McDoubles flew off the shelves. I thought I
oh,
was
did
just gonna have
they?
to make a second run. It was awesome. They were a hit.
We generally recommend that you account for 60 to 70% of your guests for late night food, depending on your demographic. If you've got a lot of older guests, maybe shrink that down a little bit. If you've got a lot of your friends who are late night party animals, maybe bump it up a little bit. But if you are ordering from, let's say, a pizza delivery place or something like that, trying to prepay for it as well as covering the tip is really important, because you're not going to want to be digging around for cash for the delivery driver at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night when you've just been pulled off the dance floor to deal with this.
Exactly.
And speaking of 10:30 or 11 o'clock, or, 1 or 2 or 3, like my wedding last night, cleaning up is an unfortunate reality that
It
is,
is.
in a lot of cases, has to happen that night. If you're at a hotel or a ballroom or a golf course or somewhere where they're likely to have another event the next day, oftentimes you have to clean up that night. And so having a really clear plan in place is important. Things like who is taking the cards and gifts. You absolutely want to make sure they don't get left on site that night. They should be locked up somewhere safe. We always clear the card box early in the reception, and then keep an eye on it throughout the night. You'll want to make sure that your decor that you own gets packed up and safely transported. If you've got vintage photos of your grandparents, you need to make sure someone is responsible for packing those things up safely so they don't get damaged or broken. You need to decide what goes home with who. So think about car space. I mean, if your parents are going home on a shuttle and nobody has a vehicle there, what are you going to do with these meticulously packed totes that you've labeled and taken pictures of? You can be as organized as you want for setup, but you've got to think about it on the other end as well. We often run into problems with people who've had a good time at the wedding and are no longer prepared to tear down. An open bar and 6 hours of drinking isn't always conducive to the wedding party being super on board to help tear down at the end of the night. So thinking through that, communicating with them, making sure there's a clear plan for who does what goes where. And also, if you're at more of a DIY venue, what happens with the garbage? What
Yeah.
about the empties? If you've purchased the alcohol, are you returning the empties to the beer store? In which case, you're going to want to make sure that they get packed up and put in somebody's vehicle. If it's an outdoor wedding, you probably shouldn't leave bags of food scraps on the ground, because that's just a recipe for disaster with
Yeah, Rocky the raccoon will come
raccoons.
and
Yeah,
visit.
exactly. Leftover alcohol is also something you'll want to think about if it's a DIY venue or a venue where you're able to provide your own alcohol. Tell your bartenders not to open anything if they don't need to. Don't crack all the wine. Don't open another 60 of vodka if it's 12:30 at night and the bar's only open for another 45 or another 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Tell Uncle Jim we're out of vodka and then return that 60.
Exactly.
So things to think about with alcohol if you're running your own bar as well.
I know. It's a really big one this year. I've got a ton of couples running their own bars, so really big things to keep in mind as well. If you've got a ton of leftover ice because you may have had a lot left in that deep freeze, it's okay to resell ice. It's all good to resell ice, but preferably keep it frozen. But I know oftentimes I always tell my couples to go overboard with it because you're never not going to use it. So be aware though, if you have to load out a deep freeze, that you are actually remembering to go down to the venue basement and get all those bags of ice, or else it's money down the drain, literally.
Yeah. And so finally, you've cleaned up, you've recovered, maybe you've had a honeymoon. Um, what should we do with regard to post wedding stuff? I know a lot of couples experience the post wedding blues because there's nothing to plan for anymore, but there are still things to be done.
Yes. Now, I know a really big thing that's happening a lot this year, especially with the DIY weddings, is the whole idea of reselling all of your wedding decor. This
Mhm.
is super huge, and I always encourage it because reuse, reduce, recycle. But some things to keep in mind is the season of things. If your decor is very spring focused and light and pastels, but you don't actually get around to posting to sell it until maybe late July into those fall months where we start to see those warmer colors, you might not be as successful. So it sounds funny to get your brain into a marketing aspect when you're just trying to clean out your basement, but doing things as quickly as you can, packing things up, organized, so that way when you go to resell items, it's not a full nightmare, it's not so overwhelming, or delegating the task of, hey, you need to sell all my stuff on Kijiji, mom. I'm over it. I need my honeymoon fund. Delegating who's actually doing the reselling is a great idea instead of you having to be responsible for it.
Yeah, and that's another thing that our A plus bride from Friday did a really great job of, was communicating with us in advance that she was intending to resell things, and that while they had come packed in totes with the individual vases and the individual table numbers and the individual place cards and the individual votive holders for every table, she wanted them packed up at the end so that all the cylinder vases were together so that she could sell them as a lot. And all of the, she had little birch votive holders, all of those were together so that she could sell them as a lot. And she did a really great job of thinking through that. So Jenna, if you're listening, A plus 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 plus.
The
um,
other thing that I'll give Jenna an A plus plus for, and Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I counted about 17, 18 thank yous out of Jenna's mouth before it was even time for ceremony. So I know that thanking your vendors on the day is critical, and it does make us feel nice, as much as it might sound selfish that we like getting those pats on the back. But getting a thank you letter in the mail months after your wedding also gives us the same warm, fuzzy feeling that we saw when you walked down the aisle.
yeah, and I'm struggling with it, trying not to sound, like self-serving with this, but I do really think that following up and communicating your experiences and your thanks to your vendors is really important. From a selfish point of view, it has been a really tough couple of years for a lot of small businesses in the wedding industry, and I think that there's a lot of burnout going on, and that it's the validation of knowing that you are appreciated and that you've done a good job and that you provided excellent services to your couples is really very sort of almost cathartic and healing for a lot of vendors who've been struggling. So you don't need to feel like you need to throw out thousands of dollars in tips. I mean, you certainly can if you feel that that's appropriate, but a heartfelt thank you note or a really awesome Google review really goes a long way. So don't forget to follow up with those vendors and to communicate your experiences with them.
Definitely. And in full no selfishness, we really want to keep in touch with a lot of you. And
Mhm.
as wedding planners, some other vendors get to really keep in touch. Maybe they're photographing family photos for you from here on out. Maybe they're going to put together family videos. But presumably, until you maybe have your own family and you might have some friends that need wedding planners, for the most part, after our day together, it's kind of the end. So we want to make sure we can keep in touch with you no matter how we can. And getting those letters is a great way to do so.
Absolutely. So this has been a bit of a marathon. Um,
There's so much to cover when it comes to those day of details, though, because like Amy says, you can think of everything to personalize and customize. So
yeah, it's there are certainly a lot of things, and if I can distill it all down into one sentence, it's just please have someone who is not emotionally invested in your day helping to execute all of those details. Whether it's a friend that's maybe not invited to the wedding, maybe you've got a third cousin, be prepared before the day. And then hopefully you can pass it off on the day, because you certainly don't want to be the one when the lights are off at your hotel and it's pouring rain outside and you don't have an alternate first location. You don't want to be the one on the phone with the greenhouse. that's our job, or
Ex-
that's your third cousin twice removed's job. So in a perfect world, there's someone who can take care of that on your day, because as organized as you possibly can be, you can never predict everything.
Nope. And we found that out this weekend.
So, with that said, thank you for sticking with us through this marathon. We will post that document of day of details that are often overlooked in the very near future. I don't have a modem and I got to figure out all the things. So, we are going to go and have a little bit of downtime. I know I need to bake some muffins with the kiddo. So, Jacqueline, hopefully you have some rest and relaxation in
I
your afternoon
do. I
plans.
do.
Good.
I'm going to do a little bit of trip planning, but apart from that, I hear a nap coming my way.
Amazing. I feel good about that. Everybody, thanks for joining us. We'll catch you here again next weekend. And we're talking about speeches. So join us for that. Thanks so much and have a great day.
See everybody.